Hi, I'm Jesse Glenn,
I'm David Petersen,
and this is the Plotmasters Project,
a video podcast of two artists looking back,
and revisiting their earliest characters and stories.
this time, Feather. This episode we're doing Feather, which is, it's more of a me project.
Yeah, as we've explained a few times throughout the series, this is when we do this, we're taking characters that some maybe are projects that David and I worked on together, some are ones that I came up with by myself, and some are ones that he came up with by himself, or some are that ones we stole from friends of ours. But that's fine too. This happens to be a project that David came up with on his own.
Yeah.
As we go through discussing, the ins and outs of Feather, he of course is going to have more insight into the origins of the character and whatnot. But I'll try to hold my own.
If you're new here or not familiar with the Plotmasters project, you can find past episodes on theplotmasters.com. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. This is a video podcast series where Jesse and I look back at our earliest characters and stories and show off all the embarrassing artwork, as well as and talk about those stories, as well as each contribute a new piece as what that would look like if we were working on that project today.
Yeah, there's usually lots of embarrassing artwork.
Speaking of which, here we go.
All right.
Feather started as an unnamed character. He was just this kind of wandering elf character with a hat that I was drawing over and over and over. Sometimes he didn't wear a hat. But he got his name Feather because my friend Nick thought that was his name because he always had a feather in his hat. And so when Nick started calling him Feather, I went, okay, that's all right. Yeah, his name's Feather. It stuck. He started as just a weird wandering elf thing that I just drew over and over. There wasn't even a story there. But eventually, I started implying story. I started writing story down next to the illustrations. But more than just being a character, I knew that he needed to be in some kind of a fantasy world. And I had all kinds of weird fantasy drawings that were laying around, different fairies and elves and dragons. And I figured Feather could just be the connecting force between a bunch of that stuff. The point where Feather becomes like a story, where something really happens, is I go through a really bad college breakup. And I'm sitting in classes and feeling like I don't know how life is going to go on. Everything I've come to know and even planned for my future has changed, and I'm just emotionally drained. And so I just keep drawing Feather as this lonesome character, and the cast of other creatures that I end up putting with him are usually pretty are getting smaller. Instead of it being this wider idea of kind of like a catch-all, anything goes, certain ones start popping up. I would write little weird mini stories next to them. Sometimes it was me criticizing my own drawing. The young elf had feminine features, but he was not. It was his bane. She is not like us, son. She is a faun, and we don't talk to nymphs of the forest. The words hit her ears like rocks being pelted at her, each word stinging more than the next. I don't even know that this is necessarily Feather, but this is the same kind of thing that I was doing when I was drawing images of Feather. Feather sensed something coming. He knew it was change, and he anticipated its arrival, although I can almost guarantee you that anticipated is a placeholder word for feared. Because that sums me up pretty well.
And so you did kind of a similar thing that I was doing when I was going through some breakups. And except mine came out as either poems or songs that the world will never hear, mind you. At least you have drawings that you're willing to share with people.
We just figured out the next Plotmasters bonus episode.
There you go. Maybe if I can rework the songs or something and the poetry to accompany Feather, as
Oh, wow. Okay.
as part of the story elements or as a soundtrack. There we go.
Bonus episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was getting feelings out. I conceived of the idea of Feather as being this lonesome elf character, maybe not necessarily a Tolkien elf or a fairy tale elf or whatever, but let's just say elf for lack of a better term. That whatever his species is, whatever his group is, does some kind of a thing almost like how the elves leave Middle Earth, and go away. That maybe this was even more cosmic, like they stop existing willingly, like they kind of vanish in a starburst or something. They have decided to move on to this next phase, but maybe with the possibility of returning to quote unquote Earth. But that Feather is the lone character who stays behind of that species. And I had different versions at different times. Sometimes he had chosen maybe to stay there with like his love, like they're going to inherit the earth. He and his love are going to inherit the earth, but she at the last minute decides to go with them and kind of strands him alone. Other times I decided it was a willing thing. Sometimes I decided it was assigned to him that he was supposed to be left there. And I kind of ended up going with that version, that it was either a choice or he was assigned, not in a grievous way, but just that he's almost the gardener. He is the caretaker for this world. The whole idea is that he is supposed to hang out and keep an eye on things and prepare for when this race of creatures comes back. And all that was a massive metaphor that wasn't so subtle. About what it was like to feel like my entire life was torn apart, all because this girl didn't want me anymore. Yeah, there was nothing left in the world. I'm all alone.
Those early heartbreaks.
Oh my gosh, I was devastated, and like really, I had a breakup before this, and breakups are hard, but this one hit. It hurt. And so, yeah, I was drawing in pain. There are these other denizens of the world that Feather ends up kind of bumping into while he's the caregiver, while he's keeping an eye on things. Some of them are these little lizard guys, and we'll get to some of those in a minute. But I wanted Feather to have to kind of face some things that were ominous, that weren't necessarily villains. I didn't want this to be like a big hero tale kind of a story, a Joseph Campbell-esque hero's journey. These are supposed to be a very kind of weird, mundane little fairy tale type stories, and very much about the emotion of being alone, rather than epic, grand deeds. But while this is happening, he's encountering, there has to be some conflict. And so he's encountering these hooded figures that walk around with torches. And I wrote little things about them. The ash people forged on, their sinister smiles lighting the way just as brightly as their torches. And the idea, I originally, I think I drew this based on Chris Bacallo's depiction of skin from Age of Apocalypse, the generation next. There's a great shot of Skin where he's kind of hiding in the shadows, and you can, if you look at that panel and you look at this drawing, you'll know exactly where this came from. But when trying to figure out at some point, like, I should decide what's under those hoods. Why are they smiling? These guys are made of ash, and they're made of the ash of the things that they burn. Which is why their eyes and their smiles glow, is that there's like still a soft ember smoldering fire going on inside of them, even though the outside is just singe and ash.
In some ways, they look like a combination between Jawas and the Cheshire Cat. And
yeah,
and also it's like their motivations. They're not necessarily evil, but there's this chaotic thing that's just, it's going to do what it does.
Yeah. Yeah, they're agitators more. In fact, and the other major villain that we'll get to also, I always meant for them to be agitators rather than specifically doing evil deeds.
Yeah.
Feather encounters and becomes a major part of the Feather mythos are these little lizard people And I actually don't even remember which came first. I don't know where they originally came from, if I have drawn them for Feather, like here, or this version, which I think might be earlier, at a point where I was trying to convince Jesse to do a puppetry project with essentially little sock puppet kind of characters that were like lizards, but they had ears, almost like elves. And I started coming up with all these designs for them as puppets, and how there would be, I was a classic D&D group. There was going to be one that was a fighter, and one that was a thief, and one that was a ranger, etc. And I started doing the design work on this, and when I presented it to Jesse, like, we should do this. Jesse went, no, I'm not interested.
Yeah. I mean, the idea is fine. I think I just didn't want to do the work. I don't know. We did a lot of stuff like that. I think I don't know what I was going through at the time, or maybe I was just burned out from some other project. I just wasn't ready for it.
It's fine. It's fine. I mean, I at the time, whatever was going on, you were just like, I remember you even said, like, I don't want to play with puppets. And we had done puppetry things before, you and I, so it wasn't even like I knew that you know, like, oh, you have a problem with puppets and I should have known better. It was just whatever mood you were in when I presented this to you and tried to do it, you were like, I'm not interested in playing with puppets.
Yeah. And I like puppets too. I would do puppetry. I'm fine with puppets in general, yes.
Just not in that moment.
Right.
Yeah. There was also, and to Jesse's in Jesse's defense, I was thinking about how we were, because Jesse and I had videoed a lot of things together, and our group of friends, we used to make videos and short movies and things, and we had tried to play with, this is back in the era of VHS camcorders and very little editing software or editing ability at the time, and so I was coming up with ways that we could do things that didn't just look like they were, you know, a VHS tape in a field. With people laying down, kind of holding up puppets. And I had come up with some things of even like a posable version, because there was going to be like there's a fighter and a thief, and there was going to be a mage, and there could be magic. And I had come up with essentially a ring of fire that would be a flammable liquid pumped out of one of those kind of circular halo style sprinklers that has all the little nozzles around it. And I was like, you could use one of those if it was metal, and you almost like a gas flame, except, and we could, you know, light it from off. And Jesse just looks at me and he's like, you're insane. You're going to burn down Flint. No. And I was like, I'm telling you, it's cool, and you're just being a naysayer. And Jesse was right. That was absolutely the wrong idea. The puppetry was still a fun, cool idea. I stand by the puppetry. But everything else that I presented to him of what we could do with these, he was in the right and I was in the wrong. And actually, I guess I'm glad that he said, even though the puppetry was a good idea, I'm glad he said no, because good Lord, the trouble I would have allowed us to get into had he said, yeah, let's do that. But like I said, I don't remember if I'm pretty sure the puppetry version came first, and then I incorporated them and kind of folded them into Feather, and I changed their proportions. Sometimes their legs were a little longer. I think people can see some very specific hands there, and even kind of some specific feet that start to look very mouse guardy. But I would keep kind of changing their proportions and what they looked like. And sometimes I'd draw them more like intelligent creatures, and sometimes I draw them more like animals. But they were supposed to be in mass. There were a group of them. There were hundreds of these. They were their own little culture. And they would be this kind of helpful creature that's there, in some ways getting into trouble, but in some way, in just a little trouble where it's like, oh no, we need our I don't know, windmill set up, or we need help building a dam, Feather. We're doing a barn raising, or whatever their equivalent of a barn raising is, you know. One of our young ones has gone missing. Help us find them. And that these guys would also be in some ways very naive, and even though I know I've drawn a lot of them kind of evil looking, they were always supposed to be very optimistic. They all looked up to Feather, and they hated the idea that he was sad. That's definitely a compelling thing. They were the thing trying to cheer him up. And I played with different kinds of patterning and things like that. You can see here some of the lizard guys. You can see a version of Feather. You can see the ash people, the hooded person. But down in the lower right is also a character that I think I named Maplewood. That was basically a Tin Man design, a Tin Woodsman design, just made out of wood instead of made out of tin.
Have you ever considered that maybe he works with tin? Maybe he's the wooden tinsman?
I hadn't. It actually, here's something that's interesting. It hadn't dawned on me for years until I was putting the slides together and looking at this slide. So this is at a time where I am at Eastern Michigan University when I'm drawing this stuff. Jesse was still, I was living in the dorms. Jesse was still living in Flint. It was the first time I hadn't been with my best friend, and I'm going through this terrible breakup. If you look at the body, the pose design of the full body version there of Maplewood, I think he's a Jesse stand-in. I think he's supposed, and I honestly never even thought about it until now, or until I was, this last month when I was putting these slides together. He's just supposed to be this like weird forest, calming, reassuring spirit. Looking at that pose, even that like hand on the hip, other hand, other arm up. You and I would pose like that, or do things like that, where that is the pose you would take, and your elbow would be on my head because I'm so much shorter than you. Like that is the classic Jesse pose of putting his
on
elbow
your head or on
Jesse's
your shoulder
head.
or something like that. Yeah.
It was always funnier if it was on my head.
Yeah.
It struck a funnier look.
Was one of the pictures we took when we did the jesters costumes like that? But it's that
Yes.
pose though.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we can't do it reversed. I can't get my elbow up that high. I actually made, and I don't have it anymore, I made a stop motion puppet of this guy. Oh, I want to do some stop motion stuff, and I brought in a bunch of leaves from outside, and I stapled them to just a piece of plywood so that they were all kind of sticking up as a backdrop. And I did the stop motion, and I didn't end up saving the file for stop motion because when I played it back as those leaves, which were alive and green before I brought them in the house, they sagged. And so you saw that as like Maplewood does this kind of herky-jerky, because I wasn't great at stop motion, this kind of like walk cycle across the panel. The background's just going, ooh. But yeah, the main villains are either these torchbearer ash people, which, by the way, Bearden was my humanities teacher. There was a point where I thought about having Feather all be told by narration, with the idea of Mr. Bearden standing at a podium giving us all a talk about that he'd be the weird, informal, out-of-place narrator. And then the other character that is a villain is the skeleton. I don't know why the large jaw. Clearly with Maplewood, I also like that kind of Tin Woodsman look. I think I did know that I didn't want it to be just a human skeleton or the skeleton of one of Feather's people. But yes, he's just this kind of weird nuisance character who, I think in some ways he's like the death character in Seventh Seal. He keeps coming by Feather and offering propositions, maybe even propositions of, but I can get you out of here. Or here I have a key. And maybe the key, we know in the story terms, maybe the key solves the brokenheartedness or something. The skeleton had the key, but no one dare ask him what it was he wanted for it. And he's this like kind of deal with the devil character. The knight knows he's playing chess with the devil and knows that that's a risky business, and that's kind of what the skeleton represented. I gave him 2 feathers. I don't entirely know why. "We are kindred spirits, you and I," said the skeleton. Feather was reluctant to agree.
I'm gonna have to go back and edit my piece. I think I only gave him 1 feather.
That's okay. That's your interpretation.
Sure. Yeah.
The last piece of old work that I will show you, I did in college. This was while I was living in the apartment that Jesse and I shared with Nick, who also happened to give Feather his name. I don't remember what comic I had seen that led me to want to do this, but I thought about watercolor painting a comic entirely in Payne's Gray, just doing a monochromatic color job. And I only did this 1 page. The text is all added digitally later. You can also see there's kind of a weird haze right across the middle, kind of a weird double white stripe. That is the seam from where this was scanned in 2 parts when I had a very small scanner. This was done on a traditional comic book page board. I think it was a piece of Blue Line Pro. But I painted this scene where it's like the lizard people and Feather have infiltrated some ceremony of the Ash people, and they are witnessing one of the a small lizard guy who's just wandered in, about to get sacrificed to become essentially the bodies of more Ash people. But I only ever did this one page, and it took forever, and so I never moved forward with it. Here on the Plotmasters project, in addition to showing all the old embarrassing stuff and talking about where it came from and what the motivations were, we each do a new version. Jesse and I are both illustrators, professional illustrators who are doing illustration work currently. So what would it look like if either one of us were to tackle this today? And it's interesting that we tend to get 2 different views of how that is going to go. And here is Jesse's.
Yeah. So with so many characters to choose from, I didn't want to put everything in there. Mainly because it took me, I don't know, a couple of years to finish this piece.
Well, not of constant work. You had started
not
it,
of constant,
and then by the time you finished it was much later. But yeah.
Part of the reason why the Plotmasters project had a long hiatus. I just went with minimal characters and the ones that I felt like I wanted to play with or I could have some fun with. So of course I went with Feather. And for his look, I tried to stay true to kind of what the earlier drawings were, and kind of what they are like is a series of elf characters that Dave had for roleplay, whether it's D&D or some other game. There's the primary one is Lucas Taver. He's a thief, but he's a good thief.
No, I mean, not really, but yeah, you guys used to joke I was the only lawful good thief.
Yeah. And he had that, and there were other Tavers that were branches of the family they weren't all thieves. They had other classes and skills, but there was just something about that look that is also present in Feather, even though he's not actually part of that grouping. But it's there, and I wanted to keep that. So he's got, you got to have the hat. He's got to he has pointy features. Of course the ears because he's an elf, but the nose is pointy. I made him so his beard comes out to a bit of a point there. I kept his clothes like swashbuckly loose, and he's got that sash, and the shirt is very loose on him, and he's got another like scarf around his neck kind of a thing. So I wanted to keep just that adventurous, roguish feel in his costuming, and the colors are basically, I think, what was already used, what Dave had been doing. So
this is hilarious. I guess I didn't even realize really that he's a Taver by default. But yeah, you've almost drawn Lucas Taver here as much as you've drawn Feather. Yeah, that's great.
And I gave his feather a little bit of a magical glow, and the shooting star coming down behind it, kind of a thing, just for some sense of magic in the world. And I don't know that he actually uses magic. Does he use magic? I don't know. But he's got this little thing.
Not in mine at all. Yeah. But yeah, what's your interpretation?
Something he's got in his hand there. Not like a major spell, and I'm not casting fireball or anything like that, but there's just a spark, just some sort of spark of small magic he has in his hand. I wanted to have some sort of mysticism there. Then I went with the lizards because I figured I could have fun with them. I didn't want to do too many of them. I got 3 lizards in there, and I really enjoyed them. And I enjoyed putting like the designs in the faces, those scroll swirls and lines and whatever, which I mean, weren't in all of the original drawings. It was
It's like
just
one or
a
two,
few,
yeah.
yeah, just a few later ones.
It's when I was trying to
I
be.
thought that was
It's when I was trying to be Brian Froud.
yeah. So I wanted to keep that, and uh, and wanted them to cling close to him. And it's um, not that I was fully aware of their sympathy toward Feather. Like Dave was saying earlier, they didn't like seeing him sad, and they had wanted him around and whatever. I wasn't necessarily fully aware of all of that, but there was still something about them. It's like they would cling to him for some reason, so I wanted to keep them really close to him. And then there's the skeleton. I thought the skeleton's fun, and I always tease about the skeleton's name, which is the skeleton in Dave's world. However, in my particular Plotmasters project revision, of course, his name is Carl with a K. Um, that's Carl, and I'm sure I'll get berated for that after the stream today, but that's fine. That's fine.
I mean, if it's really part, the only I mean, obviously you like to tease me about like you came up with that once, and then it's just like when you read The Giving Tree to me, even though I don't want to hear it.
Yeah.
My only gripe of you bringing it up now and saying that it's part of your revision as opposed to that it's part of you teasing me is if it's part of your revision, tell me about Carl and why his name is Carl and or the meaning, the significance of him having a name, a human style name rather than the skeleton, because if it's part of your redesign, we need to hear the story reason for it. So don't say that it's part of your redesign unless there's some story.
The skeleton didn't get to pick his name. You didn't get to pick your name. I didn't get to pick my name. Somebody named him Carl. What?
Okay.
My parents named me Jesse. I don't know. I don't have a reason for it. My name's not Thomas because my parents like Thomas the Tank Engine.
I've heard on good authority that that's the truth.
Yes. Okay. No, I have no reason. It's really just to tease you. It doesn't matter. His name doesn't have to be Carl. But like I said, I only gave him one feather, and it's a pretty plain feather. I struggled with him.
Feather's got the magical feather, and the skeleton, not so much.
Yeah, so the secret with him is that I was just trying to get this done. I had actually drawn the skull, a long time ago. I knew that I wanted him there. But I had his body in a different position. He had a hand up on the shoulder, and I had hit. All right, I kept moving it around and moving it around, and for a long time, I just didn't have a body on there. So it's just this head floating on his arm. And when it was getting down to time that I guess we really should do this, I should finish this piece. I'm like, I'll look up some reference of a rib cage online. Okay, I'll draw that rib cage. Let's give him a red sash. I can move on to something else.
Did he have the glowing eye at that point already?
No, that was just after I was doing some color stuff.
Okay.
I threw that in just for I don't know, effects. I needed him to have something glowy. Like Feather's got a couple of glowy things, and I put glows in the lizard people eyes. I figured the skeleton needed something too, so I gave him one glowing eye, and now he looks like the Terminator. But
I like the idea that the eye, because it just goes between, like it can be in either one, like it's floating around inside of his skull.
That could be fun. Yeah, and that's the piece. I didn't really delve into any of the lore or story of it. Basically, it was just me trying to capture, the image, just to draw those characters that I had never drawn, basically, because this was your project.
Right.
And like some of the other projects that were yours or just mine, we had drawn here and there. It's like, I'll draw once this character or once that character, but I hadn't. It's not a thing that I had done with Feather, so I wasn't too keen on trying a new spin on it because I didn't have an old spin. So
that's awesome. I think the lizard guys worked out really well. I think it's interesting that you didn't know about their kind of connection to Feather, and that completely comes through in your piece.
Especially that green one who's just like up on his chest there.
Yeah.
It's like a puppy, like a dog or something. All right.
So my piece isn't compositionally all that different from Jesse's. You know, I've got the character Feather kind of in the center, and I've got some lizards surrounding him, and I've got the skeleton, you know, just off to his side. And then it just kind of boils down to some of the themes and styles and tone. I did want to get the guys with the ash people with the torches into mine. And this piece became very much a puzzle solver of trying to fit everything in. You know, I knew that there's Feather, he has to be in it. Well, the lizard people are pretty important, need to put them in, but how many? You know, I want some, but how many are too many? Well, the skeleton should be in it. I'd like to get the ash people in, the torchbearers, but oh, there's a ton of those. How many of those are too many? And then there's Maplewood, another character that I think would have been great to fit in. And that didn't end up working out. So Maplewood didn't make it into my final composition. But it was like a weird, I drew everything separately and kind of puzzle pieced it together. But the other thing was I wanted to do this as though this was a property being done by Henson. And so I leaned into that same thing that Jesse did with the lizard characters with the kind of scroll work, you know, very kind of dark crystal Froud looking. I went for that. I also decided to make them uniform. I didn't give them any individual specifics beyond just, you know, that they're all a little different, but there's no like personality coming through because of drastically different proportions or different color or almost like a hairstyle or clothing or anything like that. They're all interchangeable. There are a couple that, you know, have some expressions that, you know, imply like, oh, this one's the more angry or devious or whatever. Feather, his clothing went to that idea of being the left behind gardener. I just went with a coat with patches on the sleeves, a nice warm scarf. The hat does not look heroic. It doesn't look swashbuckly. It just looks like a big hat that's going to keep the sun off of you while you're tending to the garden of the world, as it were. The skeleton, I was trying to fix the jaw. It's anatomically weird when you don't stylize it back like the old one, where it was just kind of like this big old, you know, block of shape. But when you want to have to draw that as some kind of anatomy, you got to figure out how you're going to make a jaw work with the upper part of the skull. And then I gave it those two very large kind of tusk teeth in front, so that it definitely wasn't human. It wasn't even just a mismatch of two different parts. Like, that's not a child's skull with an adult mandible. Putting in the very non-human lower teeth lets you know exactly, you know, this isn't from our world. I replaced the feathers that he's wearing with peacock feathers, just for visual interest and to make it a little different than the feather that Feather has. And then the skeleton is holding an antique key. I went back to that piece that I showed earlier where, you know, no one wanted to ask the skeleton what he wanted in exchange for the key. And I decided to make the key a little bit more obvious of a symbol for the heartbreak and the lost love and the emotion of the breakup that inspired the whole thing. I actually found a key very similar to this online when doing some searches for antique keys that had like a little locket attached to the key. So I used that as my inspiration. And then the guys in back, the ash people, I really did nothing other than redraw them better the way I would now. I think their design works great. I think they were a good character design back then. They just weren't drawn very well. And now I'm better at that, but also with some computer effects, I can get some of those like little glowing embers and get their eyes and teeth to glow a little bit more to get that idea across that I was mentioning. I thought a little bit about why Feather? Why is his name Feather? Like, not just his name, but the title of the whole thing. What is Feather? And I thought of this idea of a feather as an object that when we come across it on the ground, we know that it represents one of many. You know, even if you only find one feather, you know that item to be within the context of it came off of some larger creature that has many of these. But then you find it all alone. Feathers is a collection of those, but a feather is something that's been separated from the rest, which is exactly who this is, and allowed me to justify the whole idea of it as the title, because that is who Feather is. He is this kind of constant gardener who's left behind, tending to a world that in some way has moved on from his people and is left to whatever is still there.
I think your design for Feather, his clothing, his stature, things that the way he looks is certainly much more fitting for your story than what I did. Because yeah, it's that when you explain it as him being this lone last gardener. He's not an adventurer. He doesn't necessarily want to adventure. He's just a gardener, and he just gets pushed into doing things maybe. And it's a very good look. He looks run down. Or it's like in my revision, it's like this is what he was like when he was first left. His first few years, he was young and spry.
Or before they left, yeah.
Or before,
before they left, and then they're like, "We want you to be the gardener. Bye."
Yeah. And then that's much later on in life.
This is 2 weeks apart.
Oh, okay. That's a rough life.
That's what happens when you get left alone and heartbroken.
And the skeleton is really good. I like the peacock feathers because they give him more of a sense of flamboyance, as opposed to just being like a creepy, creaky skeleton who's trying to just maybe trick you into some sort of a deal. It gives him, at least in my mind, like if it was animated, it gives him a much more vibrant feeling. Like he stands up or he's down like this. It's like his movements just become broader, and his range of voice becomes broader, almost sing-songy, like a Disney character, almost more so than just what his previous design could have been. I feel there's a lot more life in that character the way he is.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is the Plotmasters episode for Feather. This is the penultimate episode of season 1.
One more to go.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you very much.